Just a heads up, today's episode doesn't get into anything graphic, but should be said that we do discuss some mature themes.
We go collecting nuts in May, nuts in May, nuts in May.
Brought it on yourselves. Nobody would have trusted you to left me alone. Suddenly near madness with your peering through the keyholes and peeping through the curtains. And now you'll suffer for it.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Book Isn't Necessarily Better, a library podcast produced by the Community Library Network of North Idaho. I'm your host, Mikayla.
And I'm Roxanne.
And today we're talking about The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells.
Yes, That Invisible Man.
Yes.
We are aware there is one by Ralph Ellison, which is very good, and you should read it.
We are talking about H.G. Wells as part of our Halloween episodes.
So excited.
So excited. So we're talking about a couple of heavy hitter horror novels this week.
Well, let's jump right into it. I'll start with a quick bio of H.G. Wells, and Mikayla, I know that you have some information as well, so feel free to jump in.
Yeah.
Herbert George Wells was born in 1866 in a small town outside of London, that's Kent. His father was a shopkeeper, and his mother was a housekeeper, or basically a maid. And little Herbert grew up in poverty, but he was a voracious reader. He did have to leave school at 14 when his father's business failed, and he became a draper's apprentice. And what's a draper, Mikayla?
A draper is someone who sells cloth and makes patterns. Like on an actual mannequin is what I'm trying to say.
They take the designer's sketch and they turn it into an actual pattern.
Yes, thank you.
And he did this for a while, but he eventually won a scholarship to go back to school where he was able to study biology. And he was absolutely fascinated by Darwin's theory of evolution. Eventually, he would earn a Bachelor of Science in 1890. And he would start out as a writer of science essays. Eventually, he got a job teaching at a university. During this time, he did fall in love and he got married to his cousin.
Yeah.
Isabel, when he was 25. Then he immediately started cheating on her.
Yep.
So they were married for about 3 years, I think. And while he was teaching at the university, he fell in love with one of his students. Her name was Amy. And after divorcing his cousin Isabel, they eloped.
Yeah.
And they would be together until 1927 when Amy died.
Right. He did also have a large series of other romantic relationships with a number of women who, in a true Truman Capote-like fashion, he vaguely, or not so vaguely probably, put into his novels.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I'd love to hear about that as we're talking about what he wrote.
Yeah, it's not really going to come up in The Invisible Man, but there's a socialite that he dated for quite some time who is not hidden at all in some of his other works.
Really?
Yeah.
So he was quite the ladies' man. Mm-hmm. He got around town. I mean, if you look at his photo, he has quite the handlebar mustache.
Yes, he does.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, by the time he was 29, he was able to be a full-time writer. And I can't think of any other writers, maybe you can, Mikayla, with your English degree, who wrote so many hits in the span of 5 years.
Right.
So his first novel is The Time Machine in 1895.
That's his first novel, you guys.
Right. Still famous today. Then hear this. And then followed by The Island of Dr. Moreau in 1896. The next year, he wrote The Invisible Man in 1897. And then, coup de grace, he wrote The War of the Worlds in 1898. I could not believe that when I read it.
No.
He's a genius.
That's actually an interesting thing about him, is that he was so prolific that actually later in his life, he wrote so many political novels that had so little substance that people basically stopped reading him.
Really?
Yeah. So he's got all these great political and scientific ideas that he's putting into his novel, but unlike a lot of the other writers of the time who were publishing not for the masses, H.G. Wells was specifically publishing to give it to people, to put it out in the masses. He was publishing in serials.
So he was popular right away.
Yeah, and because of that, he actually ended up kind of bringing about his own downfall because he put out so much stuff that it basically, at the end of his career, turned into trash that nobody read.
So it was just a glut.
Yeah, just too much stuff.
What would be a current analogy to that?
Stephen King?
Would you say Stephen King?
I would say Stephen King. I mean, every once in a while he has a really good hit, obviously, but...
He's so prolific.
Yes. James Patterson, same thing. Too much stuff.
Wow. Yeah, and I think you were touching on this, but he wrote these really famous science fiction novels. He's been called the Shakespeare of science fiction. And then he stopped writing science fiction novels. So around the early 1900s, then he started writing humorous popular novels. So I think it's what you're talking about lower middle class life. So this was different because normal people didn't really have novels written about them.
Right. It's
You're
the
talking
upstairs,
about
downstairs.
Totally. And so either it's like you'd read novels about people in poverty and then getting rich, but we wouldn't really learn about blue-collar workers.
Yeah.
And then World War I happened, and it jaded him like the rest of the generation. And yeah, he just sort of moved away from everything he'd been writing before. So why do you think it is that he only had those first famous novels?
I think because that's where he really hit his stride as an author. He's really good at the science fiction. A lot of people view him as the godfather of science fiction because there's actually a law named after him.
Yeah, tell me about this law.
It's a literary device used by many, many authors. It's called Wells Law, and Wells with an apostrophe S, but it's too hard to say, so Wells Law, which is a science fiction trope where you have a single instance of something uncanny or extraordinary, and then the rest of the novel deals with the mundane circumstances of life. For instance, in this book, there's an invisible man, but nothing else in the novel is fantastic. There's no magic. There's no other sorts of scientific discovery going on.
Right.
There's no extraneous details. It's just the one extraordinary fact of this invisible man living out his day among the drivels of society. It makes his books as credible as humanly possible without giving up like that futuristic sort of play of the fantasy or sci-fi novel. So it goes to suspension of disbelief, right? You're able to believe there's an invisible man because everything else around him is so normal and so detailed.
And the people in the novel are acting as a normal person would.
Right.
Encountering something extraordinary.
Yeah. It's been used a lot by a lot of different sci-fi authors that you'll see throughout the ages. And Wells himself later on wrote a book where he, in the introduction, he kind of explained Wells's law to everybody, which is kind of funny. But he says, as soon as the magic trick has been done, the whole business of the fantasy writer, and he called it fantasy because sci-fi wasn't a thing, just so you know.
Okay.
The whole business of the fantasy writer is to keep everything else human and real. Touches of prosaic detail are imperative and a rigorous adherence to the hypothesis. Any extra fantasy outside the cardinal assumption immediately gives a touch of irresponsible silliness to the invention.
Well, we can't have that.
Not even a little bit.
No silliness.
No. This led to Joseph Conrad, who was a big fan of H.G. Wells, dubbing him a realist of the fantastic. Yeah.
Well, he was nominated for the Nobel Prize in literature 4 times. And another fun fact about him, he was diabetic, and he co-founded the charity, the Diabetic Association, in 1934, which still exists today.
Yeah, it's now called Diabetes UK. Another fun fact, there's an impact crater on Mars named after H.G. Wells.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, he wrote The War of the Worlds, which of course we should do
an entire cast about.
Mark our words. Yeah, he's responsible for what we think of as Martians.
He is very influential also to Ray Bradbury, who is maybe my favorite short story author of all time. The Martian Chronicles, if you have not read it, is an amazing book.
I haven't.
Oh, you are in for such a treat. It is so good.
So continuing on with his life, Mikayla, do you have any more information?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about him in World War I. Now, World War II rolls around, and he is pretty politically active during World War II.
He was a socialist, right?
Yes, absolutely. So he wrote against the German political scene between World War I and World War II, leading up to World War II. And his books were actually some of the books burned by the Nazi youth in 1933. Susan Orleans, in her book, The Library Book, that came out maybe 2 years ago, talks about this exact burning and talks about how she decided to, in the course of her research, to burn a book just to see how it felt.
Oh.
And she burnt Fahrenheit 451, which, again, Ray Bradbury.
Right.
And just said how, like, deeply, deeply upsetting it was to her to burn like such a crazy work. She said it was very emotionally disturbing. Anyway, so H.G. Wells's books are burned by the Nazi youth in 1933. The SS wrote the Black Book, which was a list of people that they were going to arrest during a planned British invasion that never actually happened, but later historians and scholars and the army probably found their list of the Black Book, and H.G. Wells was on it.
Wow.
And he also was in charge of the Poets, Essays, and Novelist International Group, and he was in charge of expelling the PE, it's called PEN, Poets, Essayists, and Novelists, the PEN German group, from the PEN International Group because they refused to admit non-Aryans to their group. So he was like, no thank you, German PEN, you're out. And
no bigots allowed.
Exactly. Last thing about this, I just thought this was so fascinating. The last thing about this is, I guess going actually back to World War I, that during World War I, he signed what they called the Author's Declaration, which declared that Britain could not have refused to go to war without dishonor, along with Rudyard Kipling, Thomas Hardy, and Arthur Conan Doyle.
Wow.
A lot of big names.
It's crazy to imagine that they were maybe all in the same room.
Yeah, or just like friends.
Knew each other.
Yeah. I would love to be friends with Arthur Conan Doyle, like, so hard.
Yeah, especially when he was interested in spiritualism, which is fascinating.
Yes. Weird guy.
Yeah.
We need to talk about him sometime.
I'm reading a really amazing book right now called The Witch of Lime Street, and it's about Arthur Conan Doyle and like joining forces with Houdini. It's a nonfiction book.
Cool.
And they would like discuss spiritualism and whether or not it was real, and oh, it's a good book.
Wow. Mm-hmm. I kind of love that.
When did he die?
He died in 1946, so just after World War II, and died in kind of relative obscurity.
He was 79, so he did live to be old.
But yeah,
He died in obscurity?
He didn't enjoy the notoriety of his early days.
Kind of sounds like Fitzgerald.
Yeah, a little bit, right? Like you have a really upward trajectory and then just a steep fall off a long cliff.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
because with Fitzgerald, it was like nobody wants to read about floppers and depression.
Except us now.
Do you know what brought H.G. Wells back into popularity?
I don't.
I don't either.
Oh, okay.
Well, actually, I wonder if it was the movies made from his books because...
It's very possible.
And we're going to talk about the movie, but did you know that H.G. Wells had script rights, like the power to veto things, on the script of the 1933 famous movie? Like,
No.
doesn't that blow your mind?
That does blow my mind.
Yeah, he was able to say yay or nay on things. Like, he was involved.
That's kind of excellent.
Yeah.
And especially that early, that seems weird.
I know, they seem like they're from such totally different eras, but...
Well, think about this. This is a guy who was born when TV wasn't even like the twinkle in someone's eye.
Yeah.
Radio wasn't even really a thing. Like this guy...
They were still figuring out photography.
Yeah. The novel was just becoming popular.
Popular novel.
Yeah, thank you, yes. So it's kind of crazy that he lives through all of these technological inventions, like long enough to basically be the first person to write a book and then see it adapted for a technology that didn't exist when he wrote it. Crazy.
And he's a sci-fi writer.
Yeah.
Well, he often was credited with predicting the future.
Oh, yeah.
In his books.
I mean, atomic war, intergalactic... Well, we don't know this yet, but like intergalactic space travel. Lots and lots of things that he predicted way ahead of time. We live in like such a weird time, and he was writing prolifically and futuristically about a time that also probably seemed pretty futuristic to the people living in it. He did also write a bunch of, we didn't mention this yet, discussion novels, which were basically novels that discussed gender relations in light of feminism and like new scientific developments that were going on. And he wrote a lot of nonfiction as well, including a very famous like history of the world that's like still used today. So I think that it's probable that science fiction to him sort of took a back seat, but he's still writing about scientific advancement, just not in quite the same way.
It's just crazy that in the space of 5 years, he wrote some of the most famous sci-fi ever.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
We're focusing on The Invisible Man today. The Invisible Man, written in 1897.
Subtitled A Grotesque Romance.
Yeah, it's good. It's a quick read.
It's very short.
And it is about a man named Griffin. His last name's Griffin. What's his first name?
He doesn't have a first name in the book.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So Griffin. And he shows up in this little village in Sussex, England. And he asks for a room and a fire. It's a snowy night, and he appears as a man who's maybe been in a horrible accident. So his head is completely wrapped in bandages. He's wearing these dark glasses. He's wearing gloves. You can't see an inch of him.
Right.
And the sort of comic relief tavern keeper, the innkeeper, Mrs. Hall, you know, she's just doing her duties, and she says, "Can I take your coat?" And he's like, "No." He's basically super rude and aggro about everything. Yeah. And he's like, "I just want to be left alone," which I get as an introvert. Sometimes you need your alone time. But this is a little town, and they're just trying to like bring him food and coffee, and he's
biting the heads off of everyone.
Yeah. Maybe he's just really hangry. I don't know. Later in the book,
this would be a different novel today.
Yeah. Later in the book, he is talking to somebody. He's like, "Now that I've had some brandy and food, I can talk to you."
Right.
So I think he is ruled by his appetite.
Yeah.
And he's like, "I really need my luggage to come because I am a scientific investigator."
Yeah.
And the townspeople are like, "What does that even mean?" They're like, "He investigates things."
Exactly.
And Mikayla, you're right. It is this totally normal little country village. And the only thing that's different is there is this man who appears, a stranger, they call him.
For most of the book.
Yeah, and we find out pretty quickly that he has turned himself invisible.
What?
So he's just
possible.
invisible. And apparently he had been working on it for like 5 years or something to see if he could do it.
Yeah. He did it to a cat first.
He did it to a cat first.
Back before there were restrictions about things like that.
I also think it's funny that they say that before he turned himself invisible, he was an albino. He was like, it was easier because I'm albino, so I already was kind of see-through.
I love early sci-fi when they try and find like great explanations for stuff.
And the way it says it came about is that he figured out first like how to make his skin see-through, but he had to figure out how to make blood see-through.
Yeah, that was like a big thing.
Because if he bleeds, you can see his blood. And also if he eats, you can
see his food. It's like a science experiment.
Yeah, you can see his food before it's digested.
Wear a jacket, sir.
Yeah. It makes you wonder, what would you do if you're invisible? Well, what this man does, now that he's turned himself invisible, is he robs people. So he robs the vicar and his wife.
Yep.
What else does he do? He wanted to be left alone to try to figure out the antidote.
Right.
And they wouldn't leave him alone. And then they find out he's invisible. And he basically runs amok on the village.
Oh, yeah. He's irascible.
Great word.
Thank you. That's the only word I can use to describe this book. He's so irascible. So he's there, he's trying to do stuff. They're like, "Hey, you owe us, like, rent," because obviously he hasn't been working because he's invisible. Who would even know if he was at work?
Yeah, he basically turns his little room at the inn into a laboratory.
Yeah. And so he finally gets so fed up with him, he, like, rips off his bandages, and he's like, "Is this what you wanted to see?
Is this real enough for you?"
Exactly. And then...
And they all scream and they freak out. And
then he goes on a crime spree. He embarks on a life of crime.
He kills a policeman who is trying to catch him, essentially. Then he finds an old friend from university, and he's like, "You are going to help me."
Yeah, no choice.
Yeah, so he says, You're gonna give me food, you're gonna keep me in here, don't try to escape, I will kill you.
Don't try to tell anybody, I will kill you.
Yeah, just so you know, I'm gonna kill you. Like, that's kind of how it goes.
You're gonna help me, and then I'm gonna kill you.
He's like, "And I want brandy, and I want a cigar." He's like, "And I want pajamas and a dressing robe."
Yeah.
And he always wants a fire. He likes to be cozy.
Yeah.
He subscribes to Hygge.
He's basically me. Irascible, loves food, needs warmth. Totally me.
Yeah.
I'm basically a bear.
So he's trying to get his old friend Kemp to help. He's not even a friend. He's like, "Do you remember me from school? I was like in the grade below you." He's like, "I don't know."
I didn't pay attention to the freshmen.
Yeah. He's like, "Well, guess what? I'm staying in your house now, and you're going to help me. We're going to go on a crime spree together." And essentially it ends, the way that they finally catch him is that he's out causing mayhem, and he's naked, mind you. I love how he threatens people by like, "I'll take off my clothes."
It's hilarious.
Yeah. It is a funny book.
Extremely funny.
And really readable. You know, I think that people have an idea that books from the 1800s are going to be really dense and
stuffy.
Yeah, or like even, for example, we're doing Frankenstein, and while it's a wonderful, amazing book, it's dense, and you have to really think.
Stuffy.
Yeah, but I feel like the writing is incredibly modern. It's an easy read.
Very. I finished it in like a half a day.
But I just think it's so funny because he's this really crappy guy and he's like, I'll take my clothes off. And they're like, and with that, we saw his shirt come unbuttoned and flung across the room.
It's fine because it's very chaste.
Yeah, well, because you can't see anything. Yeah, but once he's invisible, then he can really cause mayhem because you can't see him.
You can't see me.
Can't see me.
We're doing spoilers because this is 150 years old if you haven't read it by now.
Yeah, spoiler alert.
Yeah. How does it end?
They basically pigpile him.
Yep, end of story.
They finally catch him by seeing his footsteps in the snow outside. And essentially, it's like when you see two people kind of like slap fighting. They're like kind of punching the air until they hit him. And then once they are like, okay, we got him, then they start sort of shooting the air. I think they hit him in the shoulder. And then they basically like pigpile him.
You call it a pig pile, huh?
What do you call it?
A dog pile.
Same thing.
Yeah, no, it's just colloquialisms, you know.
Well, in Minnesota, we call it a cheese curd pile.
No, you don't.
No, we don't.
Okay, good.
No, so they basically dog pile, pig pile, whatever. That's how they bring him down.
Yep.
Then they end it the way that totally happened in real life, is that that's all the people in the town can talk about for the rest of their lives. Because this one unusual thing happened. They're like, today, if you go and stay at the Arms pub in Sussex and you talk to the bartender, he will talk your ear off about the time the Invisible Man was in town. And if you really give him a lot of money by drinking there, he might even show you his books that he stole from the Invisible Man. And that's it. That's the story. It's fun.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the structure of it because it is weird, right? The way that it's written. It's written by obviously like a third person narrator.
An omniscient narrator.
Not exactly. It's like weird because it's like the narrator has gone and like gathered facts from the different people like involved. Like sometimes he'll say, so-and-so said that this happened on the 19th of June. Like,
so they don't say he was thinking.
I don't think so.
I'm just trying to think like, after the innkeeper, encounters the Invisible Man, it's like, don't they say like he was thinking this and then he saw his friend and...
It could be.
Maybe.
Mostly what I remember is that like, for whatever reason, there is an unnamed investigative journalist going through this like years after the fact and just like placing out the facts for your enjoyment, which is really weird. There's a chapter that's, literally a page long where he's like, so-and-so was in the meadow, thought he was all alone, and all of a sudden he heard a voice and he ran back to the village scared. End of chapter. Like, that's the whole chapter.
Yeah.
But it's so weird because this narrator, like, you never find out if it's someone who lived in the town, if it's someone who's writing about this for, like, a historical novel. Like, it's really weird. It's a weird structure. I don't know. I thought it was interesting. It's definitely worth reading. I've never read anything else like it.
Yeah, it's a quick read. It's an easy read. It's fun.
It's a good example of Modernist. So we're going to talk about Frankenstein, which is a Victorian novel that kind of starts to get into the Modernist period.
In our next episode.
Yes. This is an actual, like, modernist book, right? So it's rebelling against those sort of Victorian ideals, right?
Flowery romanticism.
Yes. This is a good example of a book that's really involved in, like, the power of human beings to create and shape their universe and do practical experiments and scientific knowledge and technology, like, ruling world, instead of the Victorian man in harmony with nature. And this is, like, man dominates nature. So a lot of his books are like that. And they're kind of on the forefront of that, on the cusp of it.
Also, did H.G. Wells invent the concept of time travel?
Basically, yeah.
Cool.
I mean, he's basically the first person to like write it down and have that be a popular idea that was out there. I don't know if nobody ever thought about it before, but it was
the first novelization.
Yeah, the first guy to popularize it for sure. That's all I wanted to say is just that it's a really interesting novel on the forefront of the modernist era, which lasted for quite some time in the 1900s.
When it's not necessarily sci-fi, what is a modernist style? Like how people talk in everyday life? Like what else defines modernism?
Mostly modernism is just defined by new discovery, by man having some sort of control and agency over his own life and possibly the life of other people. Even in a non-scientific way.
Because wasn't like A Doll's House by Ibsen, wasn't that one of the first modernist plays.
Yeah.
No, that was realism.
I don't know. I have a hard time with there's a couple different things happening in the early 1900s, and it's hard to separate them out.
Yeah, realism is what I was saying, like, where you talk like real people talk.
I gotcha. With you.
So that's A Doll's House.
Ibsen.
What are other examples of modernist works?
Some other modernist books are like James Joyce writing Ulysses, T.S. Eliot writing The Wasteland.
Oh, so also experimental.
Yes, yeah, a little bit experimental. Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf.
Okay.
Some things. My last thing that I want to say about the book is to make himself invisible and to make the cat invisible, you can still see the pupils of their eyes. Mm-hmm. That's the only part of them that you can see.
They're kind of cloudy.
Yeah. And he gives some weird scientific reason in the book that I can't exactly explain to you because it's pseudo-scientific. It's not even, like, real.
And he made himself invisible by giving himself injections of different chemicals over the course of, like, a month.
Right. And it has something to do with how everything reacts to the light. But the interesting thing is, H.G. Wells seems to have, like, known what he was talking about loosely. Like, obviously, that's not how the science actually works out.
But there are, like, many paragraphs talking about how light refracts.
Yeah,
and
tons.
He did his research about how light works.
Yeah. But as early as 1913, a physicist named Yakov Perlman wrote a book called Physics Can Be Fun, which I think is hilarious to think about.
1913?
That happening in 1913. And he talks
he's
about,
wrong, but...
Yeah, right, totally.
Unless you're at an amusement park in 8th grade.
Yeah. Uh-huh. But in that book, he talks about how the method that Wells talks about to make someone invisible is actually should have made them blind because of the fact that, like, the rods and the cones in the back of their eyes are also now invisible and can't actually refract light, so you can't actually see anything.
H.G. Wells is such a dummy.
But the funny thing is that actually Wells kind of seems like he was aware of this, and that's why he keeps the pupils visible.
Well, actually...
Yeah, right. Well, nerd alert.
Oh, that's cool.
Let's move on to the movie. I'm super excited about this.
So I know a lot of you might be the most familiar with the most recent The Invisible Man, which came out in 2020, right before the world ended, with Elizabeth Moss. We'll touch on that, but
yeah,
we are focusing on the OG, the 1933 that had script approval by H.G. Wells. Wow. I can't get over that.
That's so crazy.
Oh my gosh, this is a fun movie.
It's amazing. It holds up so well, you guys. I mean, special effects-wise, it looks better than a lot of the things I've seen in the last year.
Really. I mean, and just, you know, watching any movies that use practical effects instead of CGI are fun, but this truly is impressive.
Yeah.
I think it would have been shocking to watch it in the 30s, but it's just fun to watch it now. Because the fun is figuring out how they did that, or just knowing what skill they had in this.
Right. And it's just so immersive. I was thinking about it the whole time in the back of my brain. I'm like, oh my gosh, how did they do that in 1933? So I was just, like, very gripped by this movie. It's great.
So 1933, this is part of the Universal Studios canon of golden age of horror movies before they became B movies. So the other movies in this canon are, of course, Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Creature in the Black Lagoon, The Mummy, Dracula, of course, The Wolfman.
Yes. All those big Bela Lugosi and Vincent Price and
Boris Karloff,
all those guys, they're famous movies. All those
still famous today.
Yeah.
And for really great reasons. And this is a short movie. It's an hour and 15 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
So
over before you know it.
Watch it.
You can vacuum while you're watching it.
Yeah. So The Invisible Man is played by Claude Rains, and you might be familiar with him. He is in Casablanca.
Yep.
He plays, like, the inspector guy. Can't think of his name, but, you know, the inspector guy, he's always kind of coming around tricks. And they picked him because Boris Karloff was becoming known as the famous monster guy besides the guy who played Dracula, Bela Lugosi. The two of them were getting all of the roles, but they wanted Claude Rains because when he was in the war, in World War I, something happened where he injured his vocal cords.
Oh.
So I don't know if he inhaled gas or
probably
something injured his vocal cords. And so he has this really intense voice. It's sort of gravelly, but the most expressive voice you can think of. And that's important because you don't see this person's face until the very end of the movie.
Right.
In the movie, it starts just like the book. It's a little British town, and you see this stranger struggling in the snow, and he is covered in bandages, and he has these dark glasses. Google it. I'm sure you've seen this costume before.
Right.
It's become iconic.
I also have a theory, and I haven't found any research to back this up, but I have a theory that Tim Burton stole his look or copied his look for the mad scientist in The Nightmare Before Christmas. Dr. Finkelstein's face, like in profile, looks exactly like Claude Rains in bandages in this movie. So that's my theory.
Oh, that wouldn't surprise me at all. Also, like, it blew my mind when I realized that Edward Scissorhands is Frankenstein.
What?
Think about it.
Dude.
Are you as shocked as when I realized that the artist Flowrider is Florida? That's where he's from?
No, because that doesn't seem shocking to me.
That blew my mind. Oh my God, man.
Oh, man. Okay, that's a crazy fact. Thank you.
So Claude Rains got it because he has this incredible voice. And it's a scary voice. It is. It's like scary dad voice.
Yeah.
And he's mean.
He's irascible.
Yeah. Well, and the biggest difference, not the biggest difference, but a big difference between the movie and the book is the guy in the book is a real jerk, but in the movie, he is a megalomaniac psychopath.
Yep.
Because the serum that he's injected himself with also has made him insane. And this is because they also mixed in plot points from this popular book that was called The Murderer Invisible by Philip Wiley. So they also made him a psychopath.
That's really interesting. I thought it was interesting in the book that he just, like, is the way he is without, like, having to use madness as an excuse.
He's just a jerk.
He's just, he's not a nice guy. In this, I thought that, it was very fascinating that they had to have a reason for him to be a not nice guy. But
he's also, like, an extra violent homicidal maniac.
Yeah. But I don't know, it is funny because when you read the book, it doesn't feel like there is sufficient explanation for sort of like his journey.
What I also do love about I won't call him a monster. That's not really...
No.
When I did a lot of research on this, and by the way, there's this really wonderful video series called, and it sounds silly, but Kill Count on YouTube, which sounds intense, but really they go through old horror movies and they like count how many people they killed, but they also really do deep dives. And they made the point that this is the only monster movie where the monster is actually the main character and he's like a first anti-hero. Because you're kind of cheering for him.
Oh, yeah.
Like you want to see like how much mayhem he can cause.
Absolutely. I am on board for that.
I want to say he's definitely like one of the first anti-heroes that I can think of in popular cinema.
Nice. I think that's probably accurate.
Because he's the main character. He's a bad guy, but you're like, what else is good? And he has a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So this is directed by James Whale, who also directed Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein. And if you're interested in him, there's a great movie called Gods and Monsters that came out in 1999, starring Sir Ian McKellen. And it's really great. James Whale grew up in poverty in England as well. So he actually like imported extras from a little town in England to make it feel more realistic and like sort of like his childhood.
That's interesting.
In this movie. So there's like a lot of like British country people in the movie and it's real.
That's I did not know that.
Yeah. But James Whale would say like, these are comedies and horror. So people will watch it and be like, oh, it was funny. He's like, yes, I made a comedy. So Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, The Invisible Man, they're supposed to be funny. And Invisible Man's really funny.
Oh my gosh, it's great, you guys.
He messes with people.
Yep.
For instance, takes off his wrappings on his head. And that's the first time that you're like, oh my God, this is an amazing effect. Because he's taking it off and...
You can't tell. There's nothing in between, right? You just see straight through his face to the background. I mean, it's like chilling. It's so good.
It's so good. It's like you have so much admiration for the special effects people. And we should because during the movie, they hand corrected 64,000 individual cells of the movie to make it look perfect.
Yeah.
And that's why subsequent Invisible Man movies don't look as perfect because that was a lot of money and time put into it.
Huge budget. They do that invisible effect. They did it by layering multiple prints of film. So they would film a scene once in like the regular way with Claude Rains actually in it. Then they would do a second filming draped with everything in black velvet. And Claude Rains would wear black tights and gloves and all of that stuff.
So he'd wear all that and then maybe he'd have that pajama costume on top.
Right. Yeah. Anything that needed to be visible was actually visible. Anything that needed to be invisible was black.
It's early green screen.
Yeah. And it's so cool because out of each of those, they made 2 prints, right? The normal print and a matte print for the regular and for the velvet covered one. And then they put all 4 prints together. And oh my gosh, it looks so good. And then touched up 64,000 million cells. Yeah.
There is this one famous scene where you are looking at him taking off his head wrap in the mirror.
Oh,
and that was the hardest one. So you're seeing him in the mirror, but you're also seeing the back of his head getting unwrapped. So that actually was the most difficult tech scene because they had to mix together 4 different prints from different angles. And James Whale is, I didn't know anything about him before I started doing research, and now I'm a huge fan.
He's a true hero of cinema, is what I'm discovering as I learn more about him.
He's amazing.
Yeah.
Very openly gay in Hollywood. And so he lived his life with a husband. But that was, of course, like really hard in his career. And so he did eventually just retire from it. But he...
Well, that's upsetting.
Yeah, and he took his own life in 1957.
Okay, that's very upsetting.
I haven't finished Gods and Monsters, so I don't know.
Oh, okay.
But James Whale's amazing.
Yeah.
And a genius.
I also like some of the little touches he puts in this movie. Like at the very beginning, in the credits, it lists the players as Claude Rains and then in parentheses, the invisible one, which is funny. At the end, with the cast list, it shows it, and then it goes to the next screen and it's showing the same cast list, and at the top it says, a good cast is worth repeating. It's just fun. Yeah. You can tell he enjoyed himself.
Oh, for sure. It sounds like he was really funny. He also did that in The Bride of Frankenstein.
Yes, and Frankenstein. It's in...
Oh, good cast is worth repeating.
Yeah, it's in all 3 of them, which I think is great.
It's fun. I think he'd be fun to hang out with.
Right?
Do you know who else is in this? So another difference is that he has a fiancé.
Oh, yeah.
Just like in... I know we're making comparisons to Frankenstein that you haven't heard yet.
Too bad.
But we'll do the same thing when we talk about Frankenstein, is that there's always sort of like a fiancé who's worried about our main character.
Yes.
And so there's a beautiful 1930s actress. Do you know who this was?
I did, and then I forgot.
So it's Gloria Stewart.
That's right.
Do you know why she's famous?
No.
She's the old lady in Titanic, Mikayla.
Oh!
For real.
Okay, the old lady who like throws a little knife. That's my favorite part of that movie.
It's been 100 years. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That's funny, yeah.
She was a smoke show in the 30s.
Yeah.
For sure. She's a smoke show in Titanic. Right. As well.
She looks good.
She looked great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Gloria Stewart.
That's funny.
I know. I was so delighted.
Yeah.
And you can tell it's the eyes. Special effects are completely amazing.
Yeah.
And
let's talk about other ones, because there's more.
Yeah. So for instance, the ending is different in this one. Spoiler alert, it's 90 years old. At the end, they catch him because it's snowing and they see his footprints, and then they shoot him. And so you see footprints going out into the snow, which, by the way, look like shoe prints. They should be barefoot prints.
Yeah.
And the way they did that is they made a wooden platform and they covered it with fake snow. And then from beneath, they had shoe print wood blocks drop out.
Cool.
Which I thought was incredibly clever.
Well, and then he falls, right? And it's you can see it's basically like making a snow angel with no person in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really cool too. I think that's
Do you know
the
how
same.
they did that?
I don't. I would assume it's the same thing.
Because it doesn't drop out completely, which is...
No, it's kind of like, I bet you it's just shaped inside.
Yeah.
Right, like a little bit bowl-like. I bet you that's how.
And there are also a lot of wire effects, but man, they did a good job.
Yeah, you can't really see them. The only one that I did see as it was happening is he gets on a bike.
Oh, I was going to say, in that show I watched, Kill Count, they say if you have HD or just with our modern TVs, you can usually see the wires on the bike.
Yeah. It's a track. So it goes, you can see the track that it's on.
Oh, it's also on a track. Yeah. God, it's just a funny movie. So I like that they give time for humor. So, basically when he takes and he like, okay, fine, I'll show you what you guys are bothering me. I'm going to take off my wrappings. And so he takes off all his clothes, and so we have this naked invisible man running around. And then he causes mayhem, but he's really playful about it. So, for instance, people won't know he's in the room with him. So the police chief is trying to write a letter, and so he keeps moving his inkwell, and then he throws it in the guy's face.
Yeah.
And they have all these really amazing, like vaudeville faces.
Right. We haven't even talked about the innkeeper, Mrs. Hall.
Yeah, Una O'Connor.
Ugh.
She's this tiny little lady, and she is so over the top because she was an Irish vaudevillian that James Whale specifically wanted for this role, and he told her to like make the acting as big as possible. And so she is so over the top. She like pulls faces, and she's like, "Whoa!" Like she's screaming the entire movie.
Yeah, that explains so much, because this whole time I was like, why is she like
And
this?
she's like the only one who's reacting that big.
It's very incongruous with the rest of the people in there.
I think James Whale just loved her and was like, big.
Right? Una, we're going to do it again, but this time, bigger!
Yeah, basically.
My favorite line in this is also kind of playful. Right before he gets on the bike, he like pushes this guy out of the way, and he's like, how's that for a hairbrush, George Henry? And I'm like, that's a great insult. I'm going to use that now.
Well, he pushes a guy off the bike, and then later there's a group of people, and he throws the bike at them.
Yeah.
But then he takes a broom, and then he's like, how's that for a hairbrush? Because he's like poking them with this big broom.
Yeah.
And then
My favorite thing.
Then he goes up to an old man, and he's like, how do you do, Grandpa? And he takes his hat off, and he throws it in the pond.
Yeah.
And then my favorite part is later, he steals a pair of pants from a policeman.
Oh, yes.
And we see this pair of
pants.
Yeah, this pair of pants skipping down the lane. He also has an amazing maniacal laugh.
Yeah.
I don't know how he even does it. And he's chasing an old woman in horror, and he's like, we go collecting nuts in May, nuts in May, nuts in May. While just chasing this lady down the road. Yeah. It's hilarious.
It's so funny.
Oh, man. And there's just a lot of, like, really funny body movements. For instance, he just has a shirt on, and he's just, like, waggling.
Yeah. Or, like,
I'm doing all of the movements, by the way.
It's really great. I am enjoying a really great mime show right now.
Oh, God, it's fun.
Yeah.
Oh, and one last thing. So at the end, when they do kill him, now that he's dead, he will reappear.
Oh, yeah.
So it is also cool how they did it. So it's like you don't see anything in the bed except like
the outline of
a body. And then you see a skeleton, and on top of that it fades into like his muscles, and then on top of that you see his face.
So then there's a couple sequels.
Oh, yeah, so it's really popular.
Yeah, but none of them have Claude Rains in them.
No.
So there's The Invisible Man Returns, but guess who is in that one? Who? Vincent Price. Which
so
is pretty great.
Good. Yep. Apparently he's a big sweetheart.
Yeah.
Vincent Price is apparently very sweet.
Which is so hard to imagine with like his voice and his like caricature.
Well, it seems like people who make horror are usually like really creative and usually nice.
Mm-hmm. I hear that about Boris Karloff too.
He's
Boris
just like the nicest guy.
man.
Yeah, I think it's like
only the nicest people can face the darkest parts of reality.
Yeah, like Margaret Atwood would always say, like, I'm a very nice person. I just think of really horrible things.
Yeah, exactly.
So in all the Invisible Man
Returns,
they're all different people. So it's always a different story, a different world.
Right. So The Invisible Man Returns. With
The Invisible Woman.
Yes.
Which is not a horror movie at all. It's a comedy.
The Invisible Agent.
And that was made during World War II as a propaganda film. So he's not insane in this one.
Because you can't be an insane spy.
Yeah, how are you going to defeat the Nazis?
And then The Invisible Man's Revenge.
Who is he avenging?
I have no idea.
Because it's like not the same person.
Right. No idea.
Okay.
I'm assuming that one is just a mayhem film. I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
But probably just a lot of things.
Man, do yourself a favor and see the 1933 Invisible Man. You will not be disappointed.
And then if you like that, you have to watch, I'm a big fan of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Are you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Me too. You have to watch it because the very first song, Science Fiction Double Feature, goes through a lot of those old timey like movies, and it has a line in there that says Claude Rains is the Invisible Man.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
Ooh, Rocky Horror.
Good excuse to watch Rocky Horror, which is always a delight.
It is.
Cult classic.
Just one last thing. When you see the Invisible Man, he is wrapped in these bandages. He has a fake nose on, like made out of wood or something.
Yeah.
But he doesn't have ear holes. Then, when you see he takes off his glasses, there's just like tiny little slits that nobody could actually see through. So when Claude Rains was in costume, he was acting blind and deaf.
Oh.
He was breathing through a tube.
That is dedication. Wow.
This was before actors had, and the same thing happened with Frankenstein. Like, they really put actors through the ringer when they were in these kind of horror costumes. So he was acting blind and deaf.
That is crazy. I did not know that.
I wonder if it's at certain different times, because certain times you do see his mouth moving underneath. Man.
They would not do that today.
No.
And it wouldn't look as good today.
Because of people like Boris Karloff, who was a founding member of SAG, which is the Actors Union, who gave protections to actors.
Right.
So thanks, Boris Karloff, and all these horror movies. Started.
Thank you for ruining your actors' lives so that we could have safer movies.
Now, let's fast forward just a little bit and talk about some modern adaptations. There's The Hollow Man with Kevin Bacon.
And Josh Brolin.
Really?
Yeah, really.
I haven't seen it.
Me either.
Don't think I will.
No, I'll pass.
Then the really popular one that just came out with Elizabeth Moss. A lot of people saw it as the last movie they saw before the pandemic started. So that's when it was in theaters.
Yeah, I saw that right then.
Oh, it's really good.
We won't spoil it, just to say that it takes a different approach to the Invisible Man. Not insanity, but more of an abusive partner who uses invisibility to hold sway over others.
Yes.
And it's really good.
The thing I watched on YouTube also made a great point that the invisibility cloak from Harry Potter comes from the idea of the Invisible Man.
Yeah, I'd buy that.
It does.
Well, I would also like to say that the time traveling in Harry Potter comes from the time machine then.
I know, thanks H.G. Wells.
Completely unsubstantiated.
Where?
I'm going with it. There's some older ones that we'll just mention briefly. Abbott and Costello do an entire...
Oh, you're right.
Meet the Monsters series.
They must have been Universal as well.
I think they were. So
because they meet Frankenstein, Dracula, the Wolfman,
Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Did you watch The
Mummy.
Invisible Man?
I didn't watch it.
Either.
In 1987, there was a movie called Amazon Women on the Moon, where Ed Begley Jr. plays the son of the Invisible Man, who believes he's invisible, but he's not.
Oh, that's fun.
It's kind of fun.
When does that come out? Like the 70s?
1987.
It's kind of like an Emperor's New Clothes.
That's exactly what I thought of when I heard of that. Yeah. There's a Chevy Chase movie from 1992 called Memoirs of an Invisible Man. And that's kind of it for my movies, except for one that I'll mention as both a movie and a book that you should read, which is The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. It's a graphic novel by Alan Moore that pulls in... Why are you laughing at me?
Because I saw that movie under protest when I was like 14. I didn't want to see it. And then, you know, you go into a movie not wanting to see something, and so you think everything's stupid. They get into like a 6-car crash and Shane West comes out like unscathed.
So, listen, admittedly, the movie isn't great.
I know, but I was just like, I'm done with this. I'm going home. I was at a friend's house.
Okay, however, the graphic novel is real good.
Okay.
You should probably read it. It also pulls in Captain Nemo and Alan Quartermain and Mina Murray and Thomas Sawyer and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So it's basically like a monster mashup. Right? Yes. So I think you definitely should look into that one as well. There's also some Marvel comics that deal with the Invisible Man. There's a Queen song, The Invisible Man.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I'm a big Queen fan.
Yeah.
Oh.
And purportedly, the Naruto character who can turn invisible uses the same technology as the Invisible Man.
Yes, this is one of our Halloween episodes.
It's not
scary.
It's not. And I don't like scary, so I would not lie to you. If I was scared, I would tell you.
It's good fun. If you have kids, watch it with your kids.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's
amazing.
Oh, my favorite part from the 1933 movie is when he lights a cigarette.
Oh.
He lights a match and then he lights a cigarette and then you see him smoke. And it's all
so
floating
good.
in the air and it's amazing.
Other things you should read if you like The Invisible Man.
That you can get from the Community Library Network.
Absolutely. Like I said, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen by Alan Moore. You should also read The Martian Chronicles and The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury. Both delightful, amazing books of short stories. You should also read the Foundation series by Isaac Asimov.
Somewhere my dad is really excited.
Like, just pumping his fist.
Yes.
I would also recommend The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. Really fantastic. Just kind of that eerie feeling is really similar in that one. And then also The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde.
Ooh, yes.
Which I think pairs really well with this.
Which I have a pet theory that Paul Rudd somewhere has a portrait of himself that, is dying.
That's 100% true.
Yeah.
I buy that.
That man doesn't age.
No. He looks the same now as he looked in like his first movie. That's been our Halloween talk about The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. Read it, watch it. Delightful. Not super scary, but has some really good questions about humanity and the nature of our societal relationships.
And hey, I also want to give a thank you, which we haven't done before, to Mikayla's husband, Nick, for composing our theme music.
Yeah.
And for doing this extra special spooky rendition this month.
Hey, no problem. He enjoyed doing it.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you. And thank you guys for joining us once again.
Yeah.
The book isn't necessarily better.
It would mean the world to us if you would rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, because then people can find us easier.
Yeah. A little more traffic for the library, which is never a bad thing.
Yay, libraries.
Yay!
All right. We will see you next time with Frankenstein.
Happy Halloween.
Boo.
I just mean, like, his works at that point were not really notorietous?
It's in the dead zone.
The Dead Zone.
The dead zone.
Which is all we'll be talking about today.
Say that 5 times fast, Mikayla.
Heavy hitter horror novels. Heavy hitter horror novels. That's actually not too bad.